Fulfillment does not lie in reaching the top of the mountain, it's in the endeavor of trying to get to the top of the mountain by doing the very best that she can do. That's how she lived. She couldn't speak to a big audience, and therefore she said, I must speak. And she spoke to 300 people in TED Talks. Then she couldn't walk, and she said, I'm going to paint because my hands still work. Became a fantastic painter. After that, she couldn't breathe. She was strapped to an oxygen tank, and she said, I refuse to be constrained by this. I'm going to speak without it. And then finally, in her last moments, when she was lying in bed and she couldn't move, she said, my fingers are still working. My arms don't, my legs don't, my lungs don't, but my fingers work, and I'm going to write a book. And that's how she wrote the book. So that is on courage, where, focusing on what you can control and not what's happening to you.
Hi, folks. This is Hitendra. Welcome to Intersections. Our aspiration here has always been to expand our horizons, to explore the fullest of human potentialities through the act of dissolving boundaries, of finding points of connection and intersection. And today, it is my great joy to have in our midst someone who does that intersection in a way that is very powerful between life and leadership, between the public and the private, the personal and the professional. I am referring to Niren Chaudhary. Niren is the chairman of the board of Panera Brands. It's one of the world's largest fast casual restaurant companies with over 4,000 locations in 10 countries. In his previous role, he served as the CEO of Panera Brands and Panera Bread. He's been the chief operating officer and president of Krispy Kreme, and he spent 23 years serving as the leader of Yum Brands in global positions such as the global president of Kentucky Fried Chicken and the president of Yum in India. He has a deep passion for serving people and for building future leaders. He spends, a lot of his personal time in sharing much of his lessons and inspiration from his life with students and professionals. He serves on the Tufts Medical Center Board and is an advocate for DKMS, a leading nonprofit with the world's largest stem cell donor registry. He holds a black belt in Shotokan Karate and is an avid golfer, tennis player, and musician with his own rock band. So a very, very multicolored and rich personality with powerful life story. So let's welcome into our midst. Niren, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Hitendra. What a pleasure to see you.
Same here, same here. I'd like to also share that I feel you're a dear friend. We have known each other over, at this point, a relatively, short period of time, yet one that I look forward to seeing expand much in the years ahead. And yet, from the very get-go, your energy, your presence, your sense of human connection made me feel as if I've just kind of met an old friend.
The feelings were absolutely
Yeah,
mutual. I saw you and I said, well, he's already doing everything that I want to do. So
yeah.
I'm equally inspired, Hitendra, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of, a sweet irony that while we've only met in recent times, that we actually were inhabiting kind of like the same space. We both went to the same college, St. Stephen's in India, and I entered it just the year after you graduated.
That's right.
What is your fondest memory of St. Stephen's?
Well, I think, like you mentioned, I grew up in New Delhi, went to DPS, and then to Stephens, which is in those days one of the premier colleges in Delhi, especially for economics and the arts. And my fondest memory has to be the incredible friends that I met there. It was a great institution that brought people who were remarkably similar in terms of their outlook and their values and what they believed in. And many of them have stayed lifelong friends. It's been so many years ago that I graduated, but my closest friends are the friends that I've formed during my days at the college. I think that is probably my most powerful memory. And everything in the college is connected to those friendships and the conversations and the discovery of people and possibilities that happened at that time.
Wow, you're bringing back a flood of memories for me as well. Thank you for sharing that, and it's beautiful to see how much that has stayed with you as a foundation, for your life. You have your own rock band. You're a guitarist, and I have absolutely no musical acumen except for just appreciating and enjoying good music. And yet, the funny thing is that my fondest memory of St. Stephen's is that close to the end of a year, there was a farewell kind of bash that was being thrown for the graduating class, my class. And, the student union president invited me to kind of be the MC for that. And we were going to have various things happen with various talented people on stage and all that. And I decided that rather than just give, just kind of random speeches as the MC, I wanted to kind of make something, almost like a poem up. And I did. And then I was like, but it would be nice to put it to music. But on the other hand, I have no musical talent in terms of singing. So I took a Dylan-esque kind of an approach. My friend who's a really beautiful guitarist, he was, jazzed up about playing the guitar and then kind of helping me through it. And then I sort of gave, my best, Dylan like sort of kind of performance in front of all the students gathered there. And it's quite a memory I have of how heartfelt, that connection was, and how in the poem I was just trying to kind of encapsulate the power of those years into one moment of just testimony, for how important that college journey had been for us. So anyway, you take me back to that, and you would have done so much more justice to it with your talents and gifts. But
Well, as you were saying that, I remembered those mince cutlets in the cafeteria that were famous, and having breakfast there with some friends. But equally, in that hall that you were describing, my mind went back to a rock band called Electric Plant
I see.
that was playing some Dire Straits. And I remember walking into that and being absolutely mesmerized and inspired by how good they were sounding.
Yeah.
And that just kept fueling my desire to actually be on stage and play music. And I think I had started playing music back in school, but then it just got kicked into the next gear once I went into college, and all these college festivals, if you remember, all these
Yeah.
different colleges have these festivals, and we used to be,
Yeah.
our band was called Applied For, and we used to be, we used to look forward to going to these festivals and just entertaining the crowds. And by the way, most of the band members I had then are still my band members now. They're, of course, older, don't quite look the same, and nor do I, but we still have the same amount of fun and connection, and it's an incredible memory.
Oh, lovely. Do you feel like, in the spirit of intersections, right? Do you feel like what you gained there and what you learned there, and kind of crafting music in a way that speaks to the soul, of the audience, and working with a band, has any of that parlayed into any kind of insight or skill or behavior that has really helped you be effective as a leader in the workplace?
Oh, absolutely. I think maybe at a few levels. One is on just being your authentic self and not taking yourself too seriously makes you more relatable. So I think if you play the guitar and you're willing to, look stupid on stage and not be perfect and still be willing to go out there, I think is a great way to humanize yourself as you become a leader and make it easy for people to connect with you. In fact, in my most of my jobs, I was, known as a singing CEO. The reason was that I think my employees would have to politely listen to me. I used to whip out the guitar, and I kid you not, it used to actually encourage people to just reach out to me a lot more and speak to me a lot more honestly and tell me exactly what was going on, because I seemed so much more accessible. So I think that's one aspect of it. The second aspect, I think, is one of tenacity and discipline, which is, I think, any skill I believe that you try to learn, be it music, sports, a language, it follows a similar curve. You have very quick progress, and then you get encouraged, and then you stagnate, and then you stagnate for a long time. And that's when you get tested. And if you stick with it, and if you're tenacious, then you get the next lift up again. And it is that resilience over talent that actually wins. And I think it's the mental tenacity of, I'm not just going to give it up when it gets hard. I'm going to basically stick with it. And that, I think, as a micro habit of sticking with it, doing it even when you don't feel like doing it even when you think you can't do it, I think is a great habit to inculcate in many other aspects of life. And I've certainly found that to be true.
Very cool. I've shared on this show in the past, Leonardo da Vinci, he once said, study the art in science and study the science in art, and operate as though everything connects with everything else. I love just finding these points of confluence, between different aspects of our life. It's the same spirit, the same consciousness that is just expressing itself in all those different fronts. There has to be some common ground.
You're right. I went recently to a guitar workshop by Steve Vai. He's one of my most favorite musicians. And he, for 1 hour, spoke about the philosophy of music, which sounded like the philosophy of life or the philosophy of leadership, where he talked about the importance of just being in the moment and not second guessing yourself, not trying too hard, but just trying enough and doing it to not to inspire others, but to inspire yourself. And how by inspiring yourself, you inspire others because people see that joy in who you are. Now, that is so applicable, right? I mean, it's applicable to life, it's applicable to work, it's applicable to our relationships. So I think you're right. I think I also see a lot of connectivity and similar principles across all of these dimensions. That is absolutely fascinating.
Ah, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We can't sort of move on to the next piece of our conversation and close this out without offering homage to Dire Straits. You brought Dire Straits up, and it took me back to the moment in life. I haven't heard them for years, but my God, I have like the fondest of memories of some of their beautiful contributions, Sultans of Swing, and like So Far Away. And in particular, I think So Far Away was one of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. Sultans of Swing, Wild West End. I think that was a time when they were absolutely crushing it. And there was such a, again, a new, different, authentic sound,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the uniqueness of it. And I think which is what cut through. And
yeah,
once again, a similar analogy for work, for businesses, to have a unique proposition that you
yeah.
stand for. And that's what actually cuts through.
You began your career after you got your MBA, right after college. You began your career at one of the iconic Indian hospitality brands.
That's right. So I think just a short story before the MBA thing. So Stephens was good. And then I actually wanted to go to the Harvard of India called IIM Ahmedabad. And I was so arrogant about the likelihood of me getting there, I didn't apply anywhere else.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I did not get it there.
Mm.
I
That's
flunked
like
my,
super competitive. This is like the Harvard Business School for,
yeah,
of India, like you're saying.
yeah.
And it's even more competitive than Harvard Business School in terms of their ratio of applications to
Yeah,
NTU.
and I made it to the interview, but I didn't show up very well in the interview, and I didn't get through. And that was a great learning lesson, which was never take anything for granted, and
Yeah.
always prepare, and then prepare some more, and and always stay grounded, and
Yeah.
and don't declare victory before you've actually won it. So I went to FMS, which is a good school, and I had a really good exposure there, learned a lot, made some great friends. And through them, I joined the Tata Administrative Service, which is the premier industrial house in India. They have businesses in various different sectors. And as part of that, I went to the Indian Hotels Company. For those of your listeners who've been to India, it's a Taj group of hotels, and they had an affiliation or a partnership with Intercon Hotels. So I was the resident manager at the young age of 24, 25 of a 600-room hotel in New Delhi. And that's how I started. And that's how actually I fell in love with the whole hospitality business. There's some remarkably cool of you walk into your product, you're standing inside your product, in a hotel, and the product is nothing but is basically a set of experiences that you create with people and for people. And I think the people centricity of it was remarkable. The fact that it's experiential, and you can stand in it and you can actually observe what's happening was fascinating. And yeah, that's where I started my career.
That's a beautiful way of thinking about sort of your relationship with that kind of brand in the hospitality industry. When you go back to that mid-20s kind of age in your life, what were your goals at that time? Like, what were you seeking and wanting out of life and work?
When I was that young, I just wanted to do well. And what that meant was that whatever was at hand, I wanted to make sure that I was able to deliver on that and some more. I realized I was very young. I was in mid-20s. I was leading a group of about 1,000 people who were much older than I was. And therefore, my immediate task was to be able to achieve anything. I need to first be credible as a leader with the people who know a lot more than me. So my first task was to be able to achieve and do better than what I thought needed to be done. I needed to first be credible. And the only way I could be credible was to actually know, or try and to know, and to listen and to learn as much as I could from the people who knew more than me, and to be willing to do all the tasks that people did around me, and to actually respect whatever task anybody did in that hotel environment by actually doing it myself. So I think listening, learning, respecting, acknowledging that I don't know much that I need to learn, I think was the way in which I tried to build credibility. And then, of course, very quickly, once you've done that, you need to then lead. You need to define current reality, but also articulate where it needs to go. And then you're able to connect and inspire people to get it done. So, I had this unique opportunity at a very young age to start learning some of those important attributes of leadership.
Wow, there's a whole almost like leadership Bible that you've given us in the last 2 minutes. Such powerful insights for somebody thrust into their role with a need to do a lot of catch up on the industry and the various constituencies within the organization. There is so much to your story. I want to have in this conversation opportunity to unpack not just the professional but also the personal. But I'm going to, folks, for those who are listening, I want to come back to the personal side, and you will see there is an incredibly powerful parallel path that you, Niren, were on in your personal life around the same time. But let's come back to that. So professionally, like what happens next? You spend some years at the Taj Hotel Group, and then
So the Taj Hotel Group, so Tata's basically was an incredible learning ground. And what I learned most of all at the House of Tatas was the importance of doing business with integrity. And that it was possible, even in a tough environment like India, to do things the right way if you believe that it could be done the right way. And I think the House of Tatas are a shining example of that value. And I sort of deeply connected with it, and it has really shaped and stayed with me all these years, is doing business the right way. And with integrity. I was doing very well there. I was enjoying it. I loved the hotel business. But there came a moment in time, say early 30s, and I said, as we often do, I said, okay, where is my life going? I was recently married. Where do I wish to be in the next 5 to 10 years? And I would really encourage our listeners, if they haven't done that, to periodically, no matter where you are in your life, to just step back and say, where do I see myself living in 5 to 10 years? And think of that dream in very practical terms, in terms of who am I living with? How many children do I have if I want them? How do I spend my time? What gives me joy? What gives me fulfillment? And what's really driving and motivating me? And just thinking about these things. And there's no precise answer, but the important thing is to paint that vision. So when I did that when I was 30, I was living in Delhi. I had never left the country. And my dream was I want to live and compete with the best in the world. My dream was I want to give my family and my children a life infinitely better than I had, full of opportunities. My dream was I want to actually become a global citizen, embrace opportunities at that level and not just limit myself to where I am and not be, to quote Pink Floyd, comfortably numb, right? So when I stepped back and thought of it, I realized that the track I was on, which was good as it was, which was within India with a premier business institution like the Tatas and the hotels, resident managing, etc., was unlikely to take me to that direction. And that's when I did an audit of my values.
even though it was a really alluring and strong and well loved brand in India, even though it was such a great culture, you could have been in your comfort zone and just imagined a life of progress within, with that storied institution. But yet, in painting this picture that you had, it was not going to take you there.
It was not going to take me there. And I think one of the things I realized was that how we make decisions, important pivotal life decisions, are actually very subconsciously conditioned by our values. We don't realize it, but it's what we believe is important. Our decisions are in service of those values. And if we don't surface our values, we are in the risk and danger of repeating and making incremental decisions. What I did then was that I looked at this vision and I did an audit of my values. And I said, what should I do? Should I stay or should I seek adventure? And my top value, and Hitendra, you'll connect with this, having grown up in a middle class home with very loving parents. My father in the government service, my mother a doctor. Loyalty and gratitude to your first employer is ingrained in our heads. Just be grateful you have a job and spend your entire life doing just that, right? That's how I was raised, and I had this deep sense of gratitude and loyalty to the House of Tatas. And then when I was doing my values audit, I said, will that top value take me to where I think my human potential is? And the answer was no. And I said, so which of my values I need to elevate? and the value of adventure, of seeking a challenge, naturally rose to the top, and it was more reconciled with the vision that I had. Once I had that insight, it was blindingly clear to me that I had to move. Even though it was tough for me, how hard it was because there was no reason for me to move. I think choosing to move and choosing to seek adventure because it was more in service of the future I wish to create was a pivotal point. And I think that's when I think, fortunately, and when you put your intent out there in the universe, doors start opening, mysteriously. And Yum, which was at that time PepsiCo, Pizza Hut, KFC, Taco Bell were coming into India for the first time, and they were looking for an operations director. I'd never heard of those brands. I had never heard of KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell. I didn't know what on earth those brands were. But I knew that this was a global company. I'd heard of PepsiCo. I knew that it was a very successful multinational company. I knew I would learn a lot. I knew that I would have the possibilities to impact a lot more, and through that create the life that I wanted to create for my family and for myself, full of exciting adventures in the future. So that was how I then pivoted and joined Yum Brands.
It's reminding me of the story from ancient times of the old wise man, out in the desert somewhere, and he sees this traveler coming over to him, looking very tired, having walked a lot. And the traveler asks him, "Sir, this township that I see here, where probably you're from, what kind of people live there? And I'm moving from where I was, so I'm just curious." And the old man says, "Well, where are you moving from?" And he said, "Oh, that distant, town there. I've been traveling from there." And he said, "What kind of people live there?" And he said, "Oh, really not trustworthy. I was very disappointed. And at some point it just became too much. Like I just had to move on because I was very unhappy, with the people there." And so he says, "So tell me what kind of people live in this township?" And the old man just looks at him and says, "I'm so sorry to say it's the same kind of people." And then a couple of hours later, there's another traveler, very wary, also having traveled long distance, comes over to him and again asks the same question. "Sir, I'm just curious. I'm resettling, and what kind of people live in this town?" And he says, "Where do you come from?" And he said, "Oh, that distant township there." And he said, "What kind of people, were there?" And he said, "Oh, they were lovely people. They were very good-hearted people. I developed a lot of friendships, and yet, there was a moment when I realized that, my spirit had to kind of move on, and fly. And I had this adventure, in me that I needed to. And so, with deep appreciation for what I was leaving behind, I had to move on." And he says, "So what kind of people live here?" He says, "The same kind of people, very loving, very trustworthy, very, very beautiful." So, it was very nice to hear how you both, in sharing this particular moment, were honoring like the legacy of what you were leaving behind, but also, you know, had the courage to realize that, and the clarity to realize that, you needed to seek new adventures. So in making that move, you now enter into more of like a consumer products and restaurant kind of business. And it's in India, but it is for a global, set of brands. And then can you define the rest of the arc of your journey a little bit about sort of how you've catapulted from there to being the CEO and ultimately the chairman of a major retail collection of brands around the world?
Yeah, so I think the common thread everywhere has been a desire to learn, a desire to impact, and seeking opportunities that enable me to do that consistently. That's the common thread. And that whenever, a wave of change appears at my door, to have the courage to step onto it, and just see where it goes. And therefore a mindset of saying yes a lot more than saying no to opportunities. So a lot of that. So I'll give you some specific examples. So I started off in India as the operations director, then moved to the UK, and as the ops engineer, learned kind of the nuts and bolts of the business in those two roles from the ground up. Like the details of how to really run restaurants individually, but then as clusters and so on. And then I had the privilege of being asked to lead our business in Holland and then Germany. And those were fascinating experiences. I spent about 10 years moving to Netherlands and running that business, which is a startup business, setting up the entire company from scratch, learning the language, understanding the culture, scaling this global brand, but in a very local Dutch way. Was fascinating. And then I think in Germany, after 5 years, that was a turnaround situation. Again, sort of rebuilding the local team there and doing much the same, a global brand in a German. And I think these experiences of me having much like the story you were describing of, how are the people out there? Like as I stepped into the UK and now Netherlands and now Germany and had the good fortune and opportunity of not only working there, but living there. To live in a different culture is probably the most adventurous, fulfilling opportunity that anyone can ever find. And I would strongly encourage our listeners to, look for that. And here are my two important examples of the learning of having worked and lived in different cultures in the context of scaling global companies. One is, I think, when we scale global companies across the 150 odd countries in the world, very often the instinct is to look for differences. And my learning has been that you can build global businesses by looking for similarities and respecting the differences. It's not built on differences. You can't build global businesses on differences. It's actually by looking for similarities and then respecting differences. So I'll give you some examples on in two areas. One is on people and one is on brands. So on people, look for what's similar and respect what's different. So what's similar, as no matter the color of your skin or your accent or how you speak, we're all wired the same way as human beings. We all want the same thing. We all have goodness. We respond well to kindness, compassion, empathy. We're all sort of morally wired, mostly morally wired the right way, etc. We all are looking for purpose, for recognition, for love, for acceptance, for respect, right? So that's common no matter where you go. However, there are some important stylistic differences in how people behave and how they communicate that you have to respect if you want to really connect to the hearts and minds of people that you're leading. So in the UK, for example, the difference was coming out from India. I was not used to the subtlety of the English language. So when my boss would say to me, nice effort, that normally meant that I did a terrible job. Or if the boss said to me, I'd like to have a quiet word with you, it didn't mean that he wanted to build his relationship with me. It means that I was in deep trouble. So understanding that, how to like really unpack what is truly being said. Holland was also fascinating. I think out there in my team, I felt that's a very egalitarian society. Everybody has a point of view. People are very spontaneous, have a lot of energy. They don't really care much about the level that you are in the organization, and they want to be respected and consulted. So when you want to make a decision in Holland, you have to bring your entire team together and ask them what do you think across the table, and then lead by consensus, right? That's how they operate. And in Germany, you just can't do that. I mean, you can't sort of show up and say, "What do you think?" They'll think you're absolutely nuts, and they say that you're such a weak leader. It is your job to tell us what to do, and then they're world class at executing. So I think that's what I mean by look for what's similar at a human to human level, but then have the ability to pick up on the differences. And I found that on that subject, I can't overemphasize the importance of language. I picked up Dutch and I spoke reasonably good Dutch. And then I picked up a bit of German as well. And now I'm trying to learn Spanish. And the reason is because I feel that language is the way in which you build a true connection and trust. And through language, trying to learn the language as an outsider, you demonstrate to the local people that you respect them. You are here to learn. You will actually make the effort much more than you expect them to embrace and include you. It is up to you as the outsider to make the effort and demonstrate that you first respect the culture and the country in which you're going to live to get the same reciprocal relationship in return. And which has been my experience that when I do that, I have been always been welcomed and embraced with open arms because people feel that okay, he at least first respects who we are. So that's one example on the people side. The other one, very quickly on brand, is similarly look for what's similar and respect the difference. So look for what's similar. So what's similar is that you when you're scaling brands, if you look at all of these global retail brands, they're pretty much the same iconic products all over the world. So look for what's similar in terms of the operating platform that you have at the back, the way in which your kitchen is organized, and the technology that you use, the recipes that you have, those are consistent all over the world. There's no change. And that's the only way in which you're able to replicate and create the value proposition. But you need to respect the difference, the emotional difference, and the cultural context of that brand. And therefore, the way in which you bring it to life through your communication, through your design, through the way in which you connect emotionally with the consumers has to be local. The language is local, the connection is local, the emotions are local, but the platform is global, and that's what's similar. So that's has been my learnings in these countries where I lived and worked.
I love the fusion of these two opposites, right? Rather than take a position on one or the other end of the spectrum. Today, it's very common when you apply what you were talking about, even to the diversity, equity, inclusion sort of area, to be really emphasizing the differences and the need to honor and respect and acknowledge and celebrate, even celebrate, the differences. And for me, on the one hand, it's been wonderful to see that in the United States, for example. It's only recently now that I've started to see that India's beloved festival of Diwali is starting to get some public attention, and some form of almost celebration here in New York. And it has always happened in the Indian communities, but a little bit more in even the broader arena. So that's an example of that celebration of diversity that is increasingly a shift I can see in society. But I think what's getting a little bit lost there is the first part of what you said, right? Which is to also really start by establishing the common ground, recognize the similarity that there is. And you said it so beautifully, almost poetically, Naren, and the way you were just talking about, all of us have this, all of us have this, all of us have this, right? This desire to love and to be loved and to be happy, and and all of that. I love that. And then you're saying you can apply that not just to your individual philosophy or how you show up in across these cultures, but also as a brand, how you operate, as a business across these geographies. So that's beautiful. There's one point that you made around learning the local language, and I want to kind of just explore that a little bit because I really struggle with it. I've struggled with it because I feel like I've got my work cut out for the rest of my life just trying to understand and advance my capacity to communicate in English, just in English. And of course, my native language is a whole different one. It's Hindi. But like you and me, growing up in middle class urban India, English became kind of our default language because most of our education was in English, and we can certainly speak in our native language, but the vocabulary and expressiveness that we have more fluidly in English, that's been a little bit harder for me, right, in the local language. But then in terms of these international languages, like personally, I've struggled, and so unlike kind of the path you've taken, I've taken the path of saying, like, can I validate through like certain like internationally loved icons, people who kind of have met, and other such kind of arguments that maybe it is possible that for some of us we might be able to connect across cultures without having to really walk up that, for me, very steep climb of learning the local language. And so I think about people like Steve Jobs, who I don't know if he spoke any language outside English, right? And then when he died, how much of a groundswell of just emotions and grieving there was around the world, because somehow there was something that he was doing which seems to connect with what you're saying, right? That common humanity in us.
Yeah, so there are a couple of that's a great question, and I think there are a couple of thoughts that come to mind, and the reason I was just thinking, what are my motivations to do this? So first off, I think is it's different if you're just visiting, and it's different if you're living. I think if you're living and you're living there for 5 years, 6 years, and you're leading a consumer-facing company where your product is your employees in those stores, and it's a very personalized service experience. How can you expect to lead and inspire your group of humans if you cannot connect to their hearts through the window of the language that
Oh,
they
that's a
speak?
beautiful point. That's a beautiful
You know,
point.
and I think I really, and that's one. And the second thing is it demonstrates more powerfully than anything else that I respect you. And I think I respect you, and I will make the effort to learn, to get to know you, so that you can in turn open the door for me. And
Yeah,
I will do it first. But
true.
I think it's probably more applicable if you're living and you're actually, and have to lead a enterprise which is very people driven, very people focused, etc. The other motivation for me is just we were talking about earlier about this leadership muscle and your daily micro habits, and I was talking about how resilience is also a micro habit. I spoke to you that for me my big motivators are learning and having an impact, and I think of these micro habits of how can I keep pushing my learning button and curiosity. And I have found that language, which is suddenly acquiring a set of 1,000 new words to say the same thing that I thought in a particular way, is incredibly empowering and liberating. I don't live in a Spanish speaking country, but I'm learning Spanish. I have 2 classes every week, and it's the most joyful hour that I spend with a Spanish teacher that I Zoom in with. And I just am slowly sort of making progress. It's been 2 3 years now, and I just do it just for the love of it, and which is about, it's hard. So it's the learning muscle of, I'm going to learn a new skill. And if I learn a new skill, especially as you get older, I'll probably remain curious for longer. And language is kind of more of the right brain, left brain. And then finally, there is something incredibly magical when you have learned a language to the level where, if you're in that coffee shop in that country, or looking at the headlines of a newspaper, or listening to some conversation in a train, or indeed watching a movie in that language, that suddenly it makes sense. And you can understand that what people are saying in a language that was completely alien to you a couple of years ago. There's something incredibly magical about that. So I think therefore I get inspired by it, and therefore I found language as a good sort of a lane to pick up for all of those reasons.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful, and it makes complete sense to me what you just shared. My living experience has been essentially in English speaking countries. Besides India, and so I've not really had that situation arise that you've spoken about, that you got thrust into. And I can imagine, based on what you're saying, absolutely, that if I had to live there for years and operate there, then I would be hungry to want to learn the language, because I'd want to get deeper into my connection with people, and without that, right? Great, thank you. There is so much we could do to continue to unpack just your leadership journey, and yet I want to kind of like move the conversation to the personal path in your life as well. So maybe before we go there, we just like do one more little piece on leadership, and that I'm just kind of curious. You operated quite clearly in a highly complex environments, international businesses, multiple brands at the same time, in an industry where performance is so transparent, right? You get like perhaps sales data every week or every day or something. And also extremely, retail is detail, as they say. There's just so much of intricacy and complexity, from the operations to the marketing to the customer experience to everything. As a global leader of an operation like that, what practice or practices have you found most helpful to you to have clarity, to have focus, to know where to direct and put your energy, to make sure that you're kind of stewarding the ship, in the right way, with all the storms and, changes and issues that are sort of swirling around you?
Sure. Couple of things. I think I'll just complete the story arc on from where we left off to present day, and then answer your question. So from, I think, those European experiences, I became the global head for KFC, running a portfolio of businesses, a portfolio of countries, about 50 countries, 5,000 stores. And there the job was, how do you allocate resources, time, attention, focus to maximize enterprise value? And then I moved on to Krispy Kreme, again, doing a global role, selling donuts to all over the world. Fantastic job. And then the last 5 years, I've been stewarding Panera and Caribou Weinstein, the CEO and now chairman of the company. And, it's been a privilege of a lifetime. I really, as I look back, Hitendra, from, where I came, and I would never have thought that I would have had the kind of opportunities I've had to learn, to grow, to contribute, etc. So I just want to say, firstly, that it is not as if my career has been, just has just one trajectory of, unconstrained success. Far from it. I've had many failures along the way. I continue to have failures. That's kind of part of the journey. And I think what really matters, of course, is what you learn and how you step up and how you keep trying to get better and do the very best that you can. So I'm not by no means claiming that I have the final word, or what word on what works, but I'll share with you my approach, right? So my approach and my business philosophy is the following, and I've led all my companies with this mindset. First, I really genuinely believe that leadership is a privilege, and it's a privilege because you have a unique opportunity to be a force multiplier for good. And force multiplier for good, which means that enterprise value is the outcome of doing the right big things, and is not the only objective that one should pursue, especially in a world with the kind of challenges that we have. And I think as a leader today, it is our fundamental foundational responsibility to have an agenda which covers people, community, planet, and enterprise value. So that's my foundational belief, that if you're not doing that, we're not doing the right thing. And I do believe that to be able to have a more holistic impact, we have to find ways to build a virtuous cycle of profit driving purpose, but purpose driving profit. If purpose does not drive profit, then you will see the kind of understandable tensions that we are seeing today, right? But if it is a virtuous cycle and it is hardwired into the business model, that's the only way it'll have perpetuity and it'll sustain. And I'm a big believer of it's difficult, but it is possible to create this virtuous cycle. So, with that as the background and as the intent that I try to work for, my belief is that to do that, you need a strategy, as we all know, which is, how will I win? And then you need to execute that strategy. I hope you'll agree with me that strategy, I think, is somewhat easier in a sense because it's to do with the intellect. It's about setting the agenda, defining where we are, where we need to go, etc. What is harder and probably more important to get right is execution, because execution is about getting it done, and it is more a function of your heart, not your head, not only your head. And it is about, and companies that win, I believe, which may have similar strategies, the ones that win out execute their competitors. And the reason they out execute their competitors is because they have a culture where people want to win more badly than the other guys, and they have this desire every single day that I'm going to do whatever I can to be the best version of who I am, to do my very best in my piece of the enterprise. I'm going to make it better than it was yesterday, and I'm on this virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. And you light that fire in the hearts of employees all across the enterprise. That is a hard thing to do, right? So at Panera Brands, we had 130,000 people. So how do you really ignite that and that spirit and the desire to win so you can out execute? And my belief is that that in turn is a function of, three important things, which is having the right people, doing the right things the right way. And that's how you get superior execution. So right people to me are a function almost entirely on recruitment. I deeply believe that you have to hire the right attitude. You can't teach the right attitude. So you hire the right attitude that basically are compliant with the values that you believe in for the organization, and you hire those skills. Those are the right people. Then the right things are things that the fewest things that matter most. Ideally, no more than one or two things that matter most. You lock and load that into a point of focus for the organization. And then the right way is basically the behavioral norms on how to behave, how to treat each other. And that's the culture. And culture to me is like, that special feeling that you create through a common language in an enterprise. So if you have the right people focused on the right few things and treating each other the right way, that becomes almost like a virtuous circle of executional excellence at an individual level, but also at a collective level. And then that will unlock superior performance, and then that will have an impact on people, community, planet, and the enterprise. So that's kind of my belief. And finally, I'm a big believer in organizations are basically, it's a endeavor to create enterprise value through human experience. It's people with people trying to do something. And therefore I think having a people focused culture, having that humanity, that empathy, that compassion, that respect, even when you're doing tough things, you're doing it with transparency and candor and respect, is so important. And if you get that aspect right as a leader, then you're creating the right conditions for the right people doing the right things the right way, and then creating bigger impact on the world around you.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. It's really refreshing to see you be so deeply invested in performance, but also purpose and also people. I really liked your interplay between profits and purpose. It's something I've been doing a lot of thinking on, and coming more and more to a realization quite similar to yours that I'll give you an example. You take this ESG sort of work that has become quite visible and quite actively promoted and pushed for in business for many years, and then recently has had some shakedowns and all of that. But I saw a spate of writing coming from some of the investment banks and consultants and analysts to say that here's the case for ESG. You do ESG, your customers are going to be more loyal. Your investors are going to be more committed to owning your stock, and et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, you will have an uptick in your margins or your competitive market share, or this or that. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm comfortable with what is being espoused here, because what is being espoused here is that keep a clean environment and be good to your people because it'll make you more money. Well, what if somebody can prove that it'll make you less money, if you clean the environment? Well, in that case, would you stop doing it then? And kind of that's what happened. Like so much of the emphasis and case for ESG was being made on the basis of like it makes you financially, more successful. That as soon as the markets turned a little bit weak and there was a little bit of shakeout and it became less popular, suddenly there's a lot of negative sort of energy that is also starting to surge on this. And I was thinking about some of the lessons I've learned more, not from being like you, a living practitioner, but more a student, of leadership. Like a Steve Jobs. He actually really focused on purpose. He had this belief that the way the laws of the universe have been set up, money and other things will come if you do the right things. Now, of course, it wasn't a loose and casual belief. There was a lot of discipline behind it. When he came out with the iPhone, with a lot of push from a purpose standpoint, he was also making sure that he was pricing the iPhone at a level that really commanded, huge gains in revenues and margins, and just completely turned around the economics of the cell phone business, where cell phones were going down from $200 to $150 to $100, and now you pay $1,000 because you love it, and consumers are happier paying the $1,000 than they were paying the $100 because it's a whole different experience. I think the way you just put it, that it's a virtuous cycle. It's a virtuous cycle, and you're not sacrificing one for the other or emphasizing just one for the other. But if you have the right purpose, then you earn the right to generate profits from it, and the profits are needed because without the profits, how are you going to advance and expand your purpose?
I would, in fact, the other thing that I'm actually thinking hard about is that I heard that the distinction you made about if it's not profitable, will you stop doing the right thing? I'm sort of saying that business leaders need to challenge ourselves and saying that how can I make doing the right things profit accretive? And I think there is a way to do it. And I think the more you can do it, the more understandably the shareholder will, remain committed. Because eventually it's the shareholder's money, the shareholder wants a return, understandable. So the real challenge for business leaders is, can doing the right thing be profit accretive, not just in a vague, loose sense, but in a very meaningful way? And I've had experiences where I do believe that it is possible, and we can discuss that at some other time. But I think that is the real challenge for leaders today and in the future.
So here's a project that I'd love to take on with you, which is for us to collect data points and stories and examples of those moments where people have broken through these kinds of Pareto optimal kind of like frontiers or something, where they have to trade off these things and actually shown that you can do both. I think that'll be a really exciting thing to do. I have a couple of data points like that I've been picking up over the years. Sounds like you've been doing some of that work, Niren, in your own career and life. So there'll be probably a number of rich stories that we'll have just from more conversation with each other about your experiences, and then beyond that as well, developing a database of these and putting in the hands of these CEOs to open their minds up to something like that.
For sure.
So let's turn a little bit to the personal journey that you've been on during this period of time as well. And I mean, it's powerful. It is powerful. I wonder if maybe we can start by you sharing that moment where you and your wife had to go to the United Kingdom for a certain personal reason, and then what happened there? Could you share that a little bit?
Sure. So I think for the benefit of the listeners, I've lost two children, two daughters, Tanya and Aisha, over the years. I have a son, Ishan, who's a rock star and has a band called Member, lives in New York, Brooklyn. I'm super proud of him. So my daughter's the first one, Tanya, I had when I was very young, 24, and she was 8 months old. She was born with a compromised immune system, and before we knew what happened, she died and she passed away, which was very heartbreaking at that time. At that time, we did not realize it was genetic, and that Aditi and I had a 25% chance of that recurring. And then we had my son, who was fine, and then we had my daughter Aisha, who unfortunately again had the same immune compromised situation. But this time we knew what needed to be done, which was that she needed to be flown out to the UK for a bone marrow transplant, and that was the only way to save her life. I knew that. I also knew that it was very expensive. It was going to cost more than £150,000, which was about £150,000 more than the money I had. you know, I had only about $2,000 in the bank, and so I bought the tickets, and I was determined as a father, like anybody would be, to save my daughter's life and just go there and figure it out. And went there to, one, reconfirm the diagnosis, which unfortunately was reconfirmed at the Great Ormond Street Hospital, but also kind of really understanding what needed to be done from a fund generation standpoint. And it was a staggering experience. Hitendra, one that deeply moved me and still humbles me when I think of it. That within the span of about 2 weeks, we did a radio appeal for my daughter, Aisha. And we had to then appeal and ask people to stop sending money because we had raised in excess of £200,000, far in excess of what we needed. We had generated some funds, obviously, of our own, but this was far more than what we had needed. And I was just staggered by the compassion from a country that was not our own, and from people that were not our own, to save the life of a daughter was not theirs. And Aisha, her name, interestingly, was, she could be a Christian, she could be a Muslim, she could be a Hindu, she could be a Sri Lankan, a Sinhalese, a Bangladeshi, and or anybody from Asia or even from the Western world. Her name was so magical that it connected with everybody. And when it connected universally with people, people just contributed. And we were, therefore, I was the donor, and we were able to save her life. And we thought we had beaten the odds, because what are the odds of this happening? It's like, less than zero. But that was not to be. And fast forward, she was 13 years old when we discovered that the chemotherapy that she had to undertake for the bone marrow transplant had ended up damaging her lungs irreversibly. And she had now developed a condition called fibrotic lung, pulmonary fibrosis, which is like a hardening of the lung. And we were told she had only 5 years to live. And you can imagine that was a crushing blow. And I shared that with Aisha when she was 13, and we were told that she won't survive more than her 18th birthday. And that's what happened. Aisha passed away in 2015, 24th of January, exactly 5 years after the diagnosis. And she lived a short but exceptionally powerful life.
It's hard to even fathom what it has been like for all of you, for Aisha, for her mother, for you, for her brother, to have gone through this after that loss of Tanya initially. I know I speak on behalf of all our listeners and just feeling for you all, and recognizing that every day in your life must be a hero's journey, having gone through something like this together.
What I would love for all of us to do is to really cherish and remember Aisha for the inspiration that she was. I
Right.
think her story is not one of despair and sadness about a beautiful life that ended so early, but rather a life that it, accomplished so much and lived so fully that she lit up the skies. So in a short 18 years, she achieved more than many of us do in a lifetime. Certainly, what I will do is, she's got a feature film inspired by her called The Sky is Pink on Netflix. Also has a documentary inspired by her called Black Sunshine Baby on Netflix. I'd love it if people can watch that. She's the author of a best-selling book called My Little Epiphanies on Amazon. And she was a motivational speaker on TED Talks, and has her videos on YouTube, over 1 million hits. Would love it if you go and have a look at her work. But for me personally, I have kind of dug in deep, and through my journey, which has been a process, to get out of it, has been one of creating hope by converting my pain into meaningful purpose. That how can I actually make a difference in the lives of those who are less privileged? And that's why I believe that human beings, strongly believe, are born to serve. And it is through service that we get strength. It is through service through which we get healing. It is through service through which we create hope. That's how I want to live my life, honoring her, inspiring others to live a life of service, and making difference to the lives of those who are less fortunate, which is why, as you mentioned, I'm now part of DKMS, which is the world's largest bone marrow stem cell registry. And one thing that the listeners could do is just, go onto their website, dkms.org or .com, and sign up. And, you could be a registered donor, and you might end up saving a life one day.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And right there, you're exemplifying, what you're saying, as your life purpose, because here you are inspiring us and guiding us and exhorting us, to be doing the right things. So I'm very grateful. I want to kind of invite you, if you're open to it, to sharing a few reflections about Aisha with us, because I was very moved. I've seen her TEDx talk. I've watched the movie you cited, The Sky is Pink, and what really jumps out at me is, in this very beautiful young soul, right? Here she is having this early blow in her life, and then cruising for the next few years as best she can. But then at 13, starting to really struggle again with her health in a way that really has a fixed timeline associated with it, roughly, right? Pulmonary fibrosis. And yet she seems to be, so zestful about seizing, every day, right? Carpe diem. And you can see that in the clarity of her thought, in the fact that she's not being delusionary about it. She is very honest about some of these struggles with the medical sort of testing, or a relapse in terms of bad health, or a moment where she has to pull back from her engagement with life to just be flat out in bed for some time. And so she's very honest about the fact that those are real struggles. Those are not easy moments, and yet she's a fighter, and yet she's chosen intentionally to pursue happiness rather than bitterness or depression. I'm sure there were up moments and down moments, but it is so powerful to see the clarity with which she has put it out there as to the choice making we all have in life. And there's just a couple of quotes, folks, that I want to kind of like share with you from her. She's saying, if I have to have pulmonary fibrosis, which, by the way, we just heard from Niren, is very, very crippling, and ultimately, basically, a short, window of life that is left in you. If I have to have pulmonary fibrosis, I choose to have a happy pulmonary fibrosis. Yeah, I believe it's important to create happy memories so we can wipe out the sad ones. And she talks, and you see that in the movie as well. These bright and beautiful moments, of her seizing life, right, and zestfully engaging with it, whether it's watching a show in a theater show in London, or whether it's yeah, just like taking a moment to kind of dive in and snorkel, and see the deep sea type of magic in under the water, and even if her breathing restricts her from doing it in a more fuller fashion and all that. I mean, it was just incredible. It was just incredible. What was it like for you and your wife Aditi to have to take something that none of us have been really tutored for formally, and come out with a philosophy, an approach, a method through which to support her, nurture and encourage her, and yet accept, right, the challenges and struggles along the way. I mean, it's a playbook that I hope no parent has to go through, and yet some have to, and you were thrust into it.
Yes, and I think I'd like to share with everybody that now Aisha was 13, and she had this remarkable ability to focus on what she could control and not what was happening to her. And her story of having achieved so much is a story of courage and gratitude and generosity. And and how those three values helped her to make decisions and to live more fully in the moments of life that she had left. And I can't underscore the importance of those values. And let me just elaborate a little bit on it. She writes in a book, pick the highest mountain to climb on and the dullest of days to shine on courage, which meaning that when things are bleak and dark, that's when you need to set yourself a new goal and then do your very best to get to the top of that goal, top of that mountain. And the fulfillment does not lie in reaching the top of the mountain, it's in the endeavor of trying to get to the top of the mountain by doing the very best that you can do. And that's how she lived. She couldn't speak to a big audience, and therefore she said, I must speak. And she spoke to 300 people in TED Talks. Then she couldn't walk, and she said, I'm going to paint because my hands still work, became a fantastic painter. After that, she couldn't breathe, and she was strapped to an oxygen tank, and she said, I refuse to be constrained by this. I'm going to speak without it. And then finally, in her last moments, when she was lying in bed and she couldn't move, she said, my fingers are still working. My arms don't, my legs don't, my lungs don't, but my fingers work, and I'm going to write a book. And that's how she wrote the book. So that is on courage, where, focusing on what you can control and not what's happening to you. The second thing about gratitude in every single moment of just taking a breath and a moment and saying, let's remind ourselves of everything that's going right in our lives, and not despair for what's going wrong, because there's always something that's going right in the darkest of situations. And I think if you look at life through the lens of gratitude, you can discover everyday miracles. And I think it's such a far more empowered way to live is to be in gratitude and awe as opposed to despair and anger. And the last one is about generosity, which is, if you can't, she writes in a book, if you can't change your own life, there's always someone else's. Looking for opportunities to serve and to connect and to, inspire is so important. So that's how she lived her life. But let me tell you this, like I've been asked, where did she get this from? It is unusual for a little girl of 13 years old to have this wisdom and this point of view. And I have to give the credit completely to my wife, Aditi, and she's an exceptional mentor. And she was her closest companion, mother, friend, till the day that she died. And they were, I would say that the way in which my wife shaped her, and I hope that this can be a great toolbox for others to use in their lives for when they have these difficulties, or even if they don't have these difficulties. And that toolbox and that main tool is to actually create moments of inspiration that are that can be really catalytic to unlock and sharpen your own values. So I'll give you two examples. Aditi would actually take Aisha away to experience something that was truly remarkable and magical, that would help Aisha connect the dots far more than anything she could read or be told, right? Because that's not how we learn. We learn through experiences. So when Aisha was struggling with her lungs and her breath and feeling very helpless and not strong and feeling like a prisoner in her own body, my wife invited one of her friends who's like an Aikido master. And I don't know if you've come across Aikido as a martial arts practice. So this he's a diminutive guy, but he told Aisha, he said, Aisha, stand here and just breathe. Be in the moment and tell yourself that your legs are like rooted to the ground and nobody can move you. And I don't know if you've tried this, but if with the right techniques with Aikido, we asked my son, who's about 6 foot 3 inches, to come and try and move Aisha. He couldn't. And Aisha was suddenly startled by, actually, my mind is stronger than my body. And that's the realization that she had and got inspired by it. The second one was, I don't know if you've heard of Eric Wienmeyer, who's one of the world's first blind people to scale Mount Everest. Just think about that. He's a blind guy who has scaled Mount Everest. And we went and saw one of his speeches, and we were very blown by it. So Aditi actually arranged for Aisha to be flown all the way to the UK where Eric Wienmeyer was speaking. And he's a blind guy, and he was speaking with such joy and inspiration about not what he was constrained by, but what he was able to do and achieve and experience despite his handicaps. And that moment just sat with Aisha, and she said, oh, wow, this is incredible. And I think creating those moments for people around us of awe, of wonder, of inspiration can shape and move us in ways that we may not even realize and help unlock our true, potential. So I think collecting those precious moments to help inspire those in our care, I think is a wonderful thing to do.
There's so much power in what you just said. There's so much power. I see the role Aditi is playing there in really catalyzing, right? Some of these strengths and realizations and graces in Aisha, and yet not by merely, like you said, lecturing or talking or exhorting or teaching a point, but creating these, as you said, moments of inspiration through which she can draw her own lessons. What a beautiful toolbox, as you said, for all of us to take with us. That's incredible. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about Aditi. In our generation, having grown up in India, you have lots of cases of full-time homemakers, and you also have lots of cases of people blending a career with homemaking. What has been Aditi's path?
So I think Aditi has been probably the most pivotal, influential human in my life. I saw her when she was 14 and I was 16 in school. And the minute I saw her, I said, I'm going to marry you. She didn't quite feel the same way. And to be candid, a lot of the music and everything else I do comes with my desire to impress her, which I've failed repeatedly even to this day. But she's been a great friend and my life companion for so many years, and we've been through so many ups and downs. So she went to Miranda, did economics, and then got into the world of programming. Worked on the IT side with Nestle and a few other companies, and then just was struggling to just look after our children, whose healths were failing. And as you saw, that it's been like 2 decades of an immense amount of pain. And she was dedicated her life to doing that and supporting me all the way. And I don't think I could have achieved even 10% of whatever I've tried to do without her willingness to actually relocate and relocate and relocate again. We've probably moved about 20 times in the last 35 years. And she has always said yes. It's only recently she started saying no. So, so she's been a great supporter. And then she's kind of almost sort of reinvented herself with her life experiences. And if you can't change your own life, change somebody else's, which is what my daughter wrote, is what she has done. So she's become a mental health therapist and a life coach. And she has her own practice for the last several years, a very good practice. And she's just spending her time helping people deal with life issues, and certainly helps me deal with my issues at home.
There's a growing realization I'm having that we have artificially ascribed a certain kind of success, visibly to individuals, whereas actually, so much of who we are is something that is interpersonal, rather than just personal. In other words, I can't think of many of us being just the products of our own strivings and our own thinking. There usually is a person or a community of people who actually have co-created who we are and co-shaped who we are, and are probably more responsible than we are individually for helping us be who we are, not just through the physical, but actually in some ways almost like the shifts of consciousness that they help us to take from time to time. Yeah. So with Aditi, I'm just curious, she's done these incredible contributions, in the family. In your leadership path, have you at times turned to her? Has she been sort of like a sounding board, or a grounding force, or something for you, even in some of your kind of professional choices and moments?
No, absolutely. I think she's one of the perils of being a leader in the corporate world is, if you're not careful, you start to sort of assuming that you're much better than you actually are, and there's this sense of hubris that creeps in, and the ego gets fed and becomes a monster, and if it's unchecked, it basically takes you down. And you need somebody in your life who's constantly keeping you grounded and kicking your butt, periodically, and she does that extremely well. And Aisha used to do that as well. She used to remind me that I'm just her dad at the end of the day and nothing more. And so Aditi does that. She grounds me, keeps me grounded. I turn to her. She's incredibly wise, and has great intuition on people. And very often, if I'm a bit unsure about relationships or potential partnerships, I really love to take her out for the dinner and have her just without knowing much, just her instinct on the level of mutual trust and compatibility that she's extremely good at. So I think I would say that she's a more than an equal partner
Yeah.
in all aspects of life, in our parenting, at work, and just who I am and who I wish to be.
Yeah.
I trust her implicit. She wants the best for me more than anybody else would. She understands me at a much deeper level. We've been through so many things together. So I'm grateful for my relationship with her.
Thank you for sharing that. Closing out the Aisha chapter, of our conversation, she wrote a book, and then it got published at a certain point in time, and it was quite close to her passing.
Yes. So, she wrote these. So the story about her book is that she was lying in bed 2, 3 months before she knew she was going to die. And she told her Aditi that, I'm so bored. What am I supposed to do? Just lying in bed. All my friends are in college and people have forgotten about me. And what should I be doing? And my wife said, why don't you read a book? And she said, like what? She said, Notes to Myself by Hugh Prather. I don't know if anybody's read that book, but it's written in a very different style in the form of epiphanies and thoughts. And that's what triggered her thought. And she said, actually, I have so many thoughts as I lie here. I think I can write even better than this book. And there she went again,
Wow.
the highest
Yeah.
mountain to climb on. She's
Yeah.
lying there. People would have just given up and said, what the hell?
Yeah.
And been angry and bitter. But she said, I have so many thoughts which express for me the richness and beauty of life and all the extremes, the happiness and the sadness and the joys and the losses and which all these extremities that make life what it is. I mean, we feel pleasure because we have pain, the world of duality. And she teases that out through the mind of a 18-year-old who's feeling helpless about what's happening to her. And all her desires of wanting to be loved and connection, to fall in love, to have a boyfriend, everything in between. And she wrote this fascinating book along with a lot of, beautiful doodle art that she was able to do, that is part of her book. And then when the book was done, I told her I was blown away by it. And I said, Aisha, would you like for me to get this printed? She said, yes, but only the best publishing house, So I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I don't want you to have like, self-published book. My daughter's dying and dad pays money and gets it published. I don't want that. I want a good publishing house of repute to
Wow.
genuinely like my work and to want to publish it, but I have a condition. Not even one word can be edited, especially the profanity. So before I knew it, she had high standards. So I had Bloomsbury, which has done Harry Potter and such like, come to the house. And the book agent, came. I explained to him the situation, and she was like barely able to sit up in bed. She was coughing. She had this oxygen mask, and she was asking him, "Have you really read my book? Have you just turned up? And if you have really read my book, tell me which epiphany do you really like?" So she really put him on the spot, and he didn't have many answers. But in the end, that's how it got printed. And Bloomsbury were excellent. We were in touch with them, and she was about to die, and she hadn't seen her book, and the book meant a lot to her because that really expressed what she truly thought in a very honest way. We were able to actually get the book in her hand just before she passed away. The book doorbell rings, the book comes in, and the title "My Little Epiphany" is like embossed. It's like a bit like braille. So her eyes were closed and she was like totally out of it. And we put her fingers on the title and we
Wow.
said,
Yeah.
"Aisha, your book is here." And she just had this faint smile. And after a few hours of that, she passed away. So it was a very poignant moment.
Yeah.
And in a way, her legacy and what she thought kind of lives on,
Yeah.
which is why I believe in the power of just writing, of penning your thoughts, of inspiring, of like what you're doing, Hitendra, like sharing and connecting with people is so important. Because like we discussed earlier, you never know what might actually trigger an inspiration for somebody out there
Yeah.
to go beyond what they thought was possible. And
Yeah.
that's what she did. And that's what I also aspire to do.
Hats off. Hats off. I mean, it's incredible. Are you familiar with this book called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly?
No.
Yeah. So I think you may find that powerful read. I'll send you the reference, but it's called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And it's a movie as well. And so there's this guy, he is at the top of his life. He's the editor of Elle magazine in Paris. And suddenly he gets stricken with this thing called locked in syndrome that immediately sort of just flattens him. He's now in the hospital. He completely has lost all mobility of his body, unexpectedly, having had a healthy and very enjoyable life until then, and basically is paralyzed except for one thing, which is he can just move one of his eyelids, right? Like one of his eyes. Blink, he can blink one of his eyes. That's it. That's it. And then the nurse comes in and this communicator, and they train him to be able to communicate simple words like, "Can you please turn my body?" Or "Can you turn down the volume of the television?" or something, to basically be able to blink his eye and use that blinking as a code for the letters of the French alphabet, so that he can communicate. And basically through that, he ends up writing a book, and that's The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And he talks about how hard it is for him to compose precisely the next paragraph, because then when the person comes to take dictation, he's going to have to blink his eye and do it and all of that. And the reason I was sharing that is because basically what you just shared happened in those final moments of Aisha's life, where the book became like a primary expression of all that she stood for and her gift to the world, in that moment. That's kind of what it was for him. And he died the day after it was published, the day after the book was published. And it reminds me of something that I've heard from my spiritual teacher Yogananda. It's something about how the soul, life, the spirit, right? It sort of leaves the body ultimately out of choice, in that moment. There is a decision maker. Okay, now is the time. Now's the time I have to leave. And so, of course, the body might be going through a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of anything. And at some point, the soul decides that, okay, I leave now. And it seems to me there was that final act of agency, in her staying alive until she had reached that milestone. You put that book in her hands. Perhaps she felt in some ways her life had become complete and closed. And that's incredible. What a poetic sort of almost moment, really, and yet so stricken with so much loss and grief. I mean, folks. I mean, this has been a series of heroes' journey that we've unpacked today. They're in your own incredible what you've done, both as a leader in the public and the business arena. Such cogent, eloquent, grounded, example-rich, thoughts and ideas you've shared with us. But then your journey as a family, your journey as a father, Aditi's journey as a mother, Aisha's journey, of course, incredible hero's journey. And we only got a little bit of a glimpse into Ishan, so that'll have to come in the next conversation, but cheering him on as well. What a beautiful and powerful testament to the capacity for, yeah, just the redemption and growth and resilience of the human spirit. Thank you so much, Niren. As we close out, we just kind of want to hear for a moment, where you are today and where you're headed next, because that itself is a new hero's journey in the making.
Yes, I remain very inspired for what I have to do for the rest of my life. And I feel there's a lot of gas in the tank and there's lots to be done. And I'm very inspired by it. So I feel I've kind of, in a way, sort of, I'm close to ending one chapter, which was, pursuing personal success. And we talked about that. And now I'm very drawn to this idea at the right time of creating significance by serving others. I'm very drawn to that idea of like serving others. And we talked a lot about the reasons why. So my headline idea and thought is that I want to spend my life being a catalyst to help people discover and unlock their true potential. I want to unlock human potential. I want to be a catalyst to help people discover their own inner light and their own inner greatness and just be a servant to enable that. And in that endeavor, I decided that, I need to upskill, I need to acquire new skills. And so for that, I'm getting certified as an executive coach. I've just gone back to college. I'm at Harvard doing an advanced leadership initiative for a full year to do a fellowship to sort of discover and get clarity on my third chapter. And when I land on the other side, I want to essentially work against this intent of being a catalyst to unlock human potential. One, by being a coach, a book writer, speaker, be involved in academics like you are, Hitendra, speaking to the leaders of the future. So that's kind of the coaching, mentoring bucket. And the other bucket would be that I would want to be a catalyst to unlock human potential for people who are less privileged, women entrepreneurs, people of color, as an investor, advisor, and a mentor. So be a mentor and a coach is the overarching game plan. And then these are the ways in which I'm thinking about how I might be able to do that. But I'm still working on defining exactly what it is. But I'm super excited about spending all my time in just helping people become much better than they thought was possible so that they can live glorious lives.
I've over the years had the privilege of acting with a number of very successful business executives who have at some point that draw to want to give back and in the classroom. I think in your case, I see you having three additional distinctive strengths beyond that sort of very successful trajectory and career path that has obviously taken you to a really good place and will therefore position you to offer so much, so much to the world. But besides that, which is not always there and sometimes can limit, therefore, the full capacity to serve and contribute, in this kind of coaching and motivation and kind of mentoring world. The three things that I've seen you, one is that you have this incredible richness of thought processing that you do, structuring and organizing your ideas and your core principles that inform and guide the decisions and choices and how you show up in the world. That kind of discipline of codifying and structuring and organizing and articulating is not there for everyone. They may have the experiences, but they don't have necessarily that capacity. So that is beautiful and incredibly complementary and valuable. The second is that, of course, you've got this like incredible lived experience, what you've done professionally, but also what you've gone through personally, and this capacity to be able to dissolve those boundaries like you did even with music to allow you to borrow from any or all aspects of life in order to inform what it is that you want to kind of offer and share in the moment. And this third is this incredibly infectious energy you have of humility to kind of just constantly stay curious and to learn, the passion with which you talked about your interest now in kind of learning Spanish to keep yourself always nimble and open and curious. I mean, it's just so valuable because as you're entering this new chapter, there will be new learnings, right? And I can see the way you are approaching it with that sense of going back to the basics, going back to that sense of innate curiosity and all of that. So with all of those gifts that you have, this is going to be an incredibly luminous chapter, not just for you, but for all the lives you touch.
Thank you so much, Hitendra. It means a lot to me.
Very, very grateful to you and to all those in your family and beyond who have supported and gotten you to be who you are, Niren. And thank you for giving us the gift of Aisha's story as well. Today has been very moving, very beautiful.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Cheering you on.